But for some people, that's not a character flaw.
Right. One of the things that I used to say in my class all the time is we're not just human beings. We aren't just existing here. We're dynamic and we should be growing, right? So we're human becoming. And I think in reality, we need to realize that character aspect to us, if we realize that we can grow those character skills, it doesn't really matter whether we're in one culture or another. Some of those character skills have the same language without even speaking one physical word to another person in another culture, right?
Welcome to the Maverick Paradox podcast, the show for business owners, organizational leaders, and the pathologically curious. I'm Judith Germain, a Maverick leadership expert exploring what it really takes to lead in a world that doesn't always make sense. If you're ready to think differently, challenge the status quo, navigate complexity, and drive real impact, you're in the right place. And today, our guest is Dane Deutsch. How are you doing?
Great. I'm doing great. It's Thanksgiving here in the United States, so very happy and thankful for relationships with a lot of the people that I've had over this last year, and counting all my blessings today. Thank you, Judith.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Is it something that you do often, count your blessings? Like, do you do a gratitude journal or anything like that?
Yeah, actually, each morning when I have my devotion, I actually, that's one of the first things that I do is just restate my blessings and how grateful I am for being able to first and foremost, have relationships with other people that make life rich.
Oh, yeah. Cool. Excellent. Tell us a bit more about you then.
Yeah, so just quickly, I grew up in Venezuela for 4 years. My dad was in the Air Force, so we moved around a lot. And when I got in the Air Force after graduating from college, because I had calculus, they stuck me in communications, which in those days wasn't called information technologies or IT. That's what we call it today. But it really was the same thing. And I spent 5 years in Turkey, 3 consecutive tours with my family on all 3 tours, and learned so much about leadership and development and growth, personal growth. And I was fortunate and blessed to have had a really great boss that came out of the White House with President Reagan. And we put in actually the first internet in all of Europe, Middle East, and Northern Africa. It was called ARPANET in those days in the 1980s. And today we know it as the internet. And that's why we're here today, right?
That is super cool, that is. Thanks for sharing that. I guess with you moving around a lot then, you must have seen how leadership plays out in different cultures.
Yeah, absolutely. It was interesting because you're in the UK, right?
Yeah.
And I'm here in the United States. But we learned so much, especially when I was growing up. 7 to 11 years old is when I was in Venezuela. A lot of my friends were Venezuelan. And interesting that when I was in the second and third grade, I had a lot of friends that were from Cuba. They were exiled out of Cuba. Their dads got them out, but their moms didn't make it out. And they were, in those days, you had desks that you actually shared, right? So you sat in 2 different seats, but you'd lift different parts of the desk. And Lucila Peña and a couple of other people were some of my best friends from Cuba. So I learned an awful lot about freedom, even at such a young age. And then having been in Turkey, I was responsible for managing all the IT from one end of the country to the other. So from Iraq to Istanbul and from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. And there were lots of cultures inside Turkey that did not speak Turkish. In fact, some of the people that were Turkish did not even know the dialect that they were talking in. But sometimes I would be on the very far eastern side of Turkey and talking to Kurds. Sometimes I'd be towards Syria. Sometimes I'd be up in Istanbul, and all of that. I had a situation where I had all of the people from one end of the country to the other in lots of different cultures and lots of different situations, right? It wasn't just in the military format, but also in terms of making sure that I had, just civilian when I go on a tourist kind of event or outing, as well as in other kinds of situations. So
Brilliant.
it was a great experience.
What did you learn from all those different cultures then, or observing all those different cultures?
So really simply, the number one thing that I learned is that, especially in Turkey, was that your handshake is your word. It's your bond. And
Mm.
it didn't matter if I had met a Turk just like 15 minutes earlier, they actually would lay their lives down for you. And it didn't take a long period of time. They were just very honorable and respectful and committed, right? A lot of courage. And so I brought that back to the United States, the whole idea that, hey, in some places, if you go to the Far East, I climbed Mount Ararat, for instance, with a team of climbers. None of us were experienced. We almost lost 2 people on that climb, and it was very dangerous. In Turkish, Mount Ararat is Arida. Ari means pain, Da means mountain. So Ararat is the mountain of pain. And it was painful because we almost lost 2 people, one to altitude sickness, one to hypothermia. But we also had 21 terrorists on the mountain at the time, and the commandos and gendarme were protecting us. But, when you ask me, what did you learn? I think the number one thing that I learned is that it's about relationships. And most of us around the world speak a common language. And that common language is the ability to care for one another. I taught at a university and I retired about a year ago. One of the things I taught the students, and it was a cyber technology character ethics class, was that the golden rule is in every single culture we've got. They may not call it the golden rule. Some of them call it the platinum rule, or some will call it something else. But every culture has something like the golden rule where you do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And that's probably the number one thing that I brought away from my 5 years in Turkey, was that ability to build rich relationships with people, because language was not the barrier. The handshake and honoring each other was huge.
It was really interesting. So is that why you say that character is the foundation of leadership?
Yeah, it is. I think, in my tricycle effect, I used that big wheel in the front. And just to preface this, we're all adults, yes, but we're still big kids. Our personality that we had when we were 3 to 7 years old is really the same personality we have now. That doesn't change too much. What does change is our character. We can actually mold our character. We can develop the character skills and eventually the character habits that help us have a fulfilling life, right? And so oftentimes I tell people, hey, that front wheel on a character, and most of us have ridden a tricycle or a big wheel at least, right? When we were little. So we're familiar with that tricycle. And if we can paint that image in our mind of, hey, that big wheel on the front is the character skills wheel. All the spokes on that wheel are things like trustworthiness, respect, responsibility, fairness, caring, empathy, loyalty, integrity, right? The back 2 wheels I call the competence wheels. And I told you I'm a gymnastics coach, so I love the word balance, right? We like balance in life. And those 2 wheels should be about the same size. One is the technical wheel. Can you bake a cake? Can you type on the keyboard? Can you give a speech? Any number of things technically that we all train for. The other one is the people skills wheel. Things like communication, teamwork, leadership. So very important. And those 2 wheels are smaller. And then the seat on the tricycle is what I call the seat of courage. If you think about it, on a tricycle, the handlebars are connected to the front wheel, that character skills wheel. The pedals are connected to the front wheel. So you get your direction and your momentum in life from the character skills wheel. But it's the courage and the vision with the courage to make the right decision at the right time for the right reason. And so, yes, I think we need to lead with character first. And most people have heard John Maxwell or other leadership experts say everything rises and falls on leadership. But even John Maxwell says that leadership rises and falls on character. But very few leadership experts really kind of dive into the idea that we can talk about character and ethics. Sometimes that's just a taboo subject. And if we talked about it more, I think we would have much better opportunity to be able to be adding value to each other in life.
Okay. I like that. How would you describe character?
So if you think about character, I think in Chinese, the word for character is actually an imprint. And we sometimes say in the old days when we had printing presses, that you were printing characters, right? And so each of us is its own character. Well,
Right.
developing character skills like trustworthiness, respect, responsibility is just the effort to be able to put forth the opportunity, if you will, to put forth. If you want to be more respectful, you show more respect. If you want to be more caring, you practice care. If you want to be more empathetic, you practice empathy. So it's practicing the character skills that are the things that we have a tough time measuring a lot of times, but are probably the most important things that we can show each other, like care. Care is part of character, right? We're a care actor. Not that we're acting fake, but that we're acting with care all the time. So that my definition of character is it is the foundation of leadership. And I love John Maxwell's a definition of leadership. And he says it's just influence, nothing more, nothing less. And when people say, well, okay, leadership with character, what does that look like? Think about any teachers you've had or your parents or other close relationships you had. And most of the time people say, why did they make an impact in you? Because they knew they cared about me, or they empathized with where I was at, right? Or they respected me, or they trusted me. So those character skills are the things that we are left with after a person is gone. That's kind of in their wake. That's what we remember most, is those imprints of character from another person on our lives. I love to say that in the tricycle effect, things like the competence wheels in the back, the technical and people skills, those are the things that allow us to have success in life. But if we want to really go beyond success, where we're adding significance to people, then we need to be able to lead with that character wheel and bring out all those skills and make them habits so that every day we're living with trustworthiness, respect, responsibility, fairness, and all the other spokes that go together on the character wheel.
Thank you. First of all, you picked my favorite Maxwell quote. So that's something I talk about all the time. It is my favorite quote. So I'm glad you picked that. I was trying hard not to smile too much when you said that. And character is, I guess you could say, character is the qualities that we have that is unique to us, or the combination of unique to us. But it also includes not just, I don't know, our principles, what we believe in, but also like morals and ethics and all those kind of things, like you say, that when you get into the workplace, we don't measure for or anything. It's quite interesting actually, because we talk about leadership skills. You got me thinking now, but we never really think about character in those leadership skills unless you're in an industry where you have to. So, like, I've worked in industries where you have to follow, there's this term called being a fit and proper person. So it has a specific meaning in certain industries. And when I've worked in those industries, that's something that's talked about a lot.
Yeah.
Outside of those, or even like insurance as well. So, like in the UK, insurance has its own law, and one of the aspects of the law is like a moral dimension to it. So it's like, so again, it's something that you think about a lot. But outside of those industries, like a typical corporate, no one talks about it. I've just realised that nobody really talks about things, or if they talk about ethics like you do now, it's kind of it's still distinct from the person, isn't it? It's like, but ethical leadership, but we then put it on the company. We don't actually put it on the individual in the work situation.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point, Judith. As a university instructor teaching cyber technology ethics, most of my students came into class thinking they were going to get a class on ethics and philosophy, right? They didn't realize they were coming in to actually learn about character ethics. real practical character skills that we can actually embrace to become habit. Let me give you a great example. You mentioned corporate. I love that. Let's just talk for a second about that. I was at a convention in Milwaukee last year, and a person came up to me who had just within the last year started a new company, trying to make sales. You're trying to tracker, move ahead so you can make sales and get some cash flow and all that kind of thing. He said, I was doing awful. I was failing, Dane. And I couldn't figure out what was going on. I hired these salespeople. They had degrees in sales or marketing and should have been able to make a lot of sales. We were making no sales at all. And he said, one day I lost a salesperson, had to bring another person on. And this nurse applied. She had left the medical industry and thought, you know what? I got to get out of the medical industry. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'll just apply. And so she did. Within a very short period of time, she was his top salesperson. He attributed that to the fact that the nurses have empathy naturally. They're able to feel and sense on the other end of the phone what that person is saying and feeling and needing and address it properly, right? So very interesting. He says, now I hire nothing but nurses for my sales force. So there's an example of leading with character, right? He realized that empathy was the character skill that allowed them, those salespeople in his organization, to lead and move forward and influence the other end so that they would purchase their product and service. Yeah, it was really interesting conversation.
I have a hypothesis that says there's probably one more thing about these nurses. They will be excellent soft sellers. So they're the ones that can persuade you to have that injection that's going to hurt or whatever. So I'd imagine along with their empathy in the sales, they knew how to soft sell, listen to cues, address those things in an empathetic and ethical way that maybe a traditional salesperson might not have considered.
Right.
Let's listen to a quick advert. I create clear thinking and decisive leaders who can amplify their influence. Contact me to find out how I can help you or your organization.
Yeah, and you read any sales book, and a lot of times they'll tell you, here's how you close the sale, here's what you do beforehand and so forth. But my guess is that if I took a recording of one of these nurses doing their sales call, they would actually be learning more about the customer than what most salespeople do. I love this, Judith. I think if you haven't heard this before, you'll like this as well. Listen and silent not only have the same number of letters, but they have the same letters in those words. So to be able to listen, you have to be silent sometimes. And I think those nurses have the ability to know when to be silent and when to be able to nurse, so to speak.
Because they would have been able to hold the emotions quite well and hold the silence quite well.
Absolutely.
Interesting. So what are the myths about character in business? Why is it that we're not talking about it? We obviously must be frightened of the word.
Yeah, I think number one is people just don't think that we always talk about character as the thing, the character is kind of like it's set in stone, but in reality, it's not. So that's the number one myth that I've got to bust when I talk to people and I tell them I'm a character coach, is they're like, well, what is a character coach, right? But it's really a character leadership coach because I'm trying to help them form that foundation of character so they can build their leadership skills on top of that. But first, the character skills have to come. One of the things that I think is really helps to kind of bring this out a little bit further is the definitions of manager and leader. If I go to a crowd when I'm speaking, a lot of times they'll say, well, how many of you are managers in the crowd? Lots of people will raise their hand. I say, well, how many people do you manage? And a lot of them will start answering, right? 5, 10, 20, 30, whatever it happens to be. I go, none of you manage people. You lead people because you influence people. You manage things like processes, procedures, right? Those are the things that you manage. Yes, you have a team that you lead that help you manage those things, but we manage things, we lead people. And bringing that back to the character myth is the same thing. if we have people who think that they can manage other people, but really that doesn't happen. People might let you manage them or think that they'll let you, they make you think that they can manage you, but in reality, you can't manage any person. Just like you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. You can say that you manage them, but you really don't. You can lead them and influence them. And if you lead with character first, you can influence them the best. And so the whole thing goes back to the idea, the myth that, hey, we really can't build our character skills. But again, we really can. Our personality is what we can't change a lot, but our character, that we can always improve on. That's always some skill that we can work on and work on it well enough that it becomes a habit. I'm a gymnastics coach, so I teach lots of skills, especially kids that can tumble across a beam that's only 4 inches wide, right? That's 3.5 feet off the floor. How do you do that? Takes a lot of repetition, takes determination, goal setting, all the things that we do in the leadership environment inside corporate or even in our families. But very few people actually talk about character. So this last week is an example. We can teach all the technical. We've got a big meet coming up soon. And they're doing their tricks now. We moved into routines because it's actual season for competition now, right? But what's happening is they're going back and they're filling out their cards. And we found a couple of the kids were not necessarily filling out their cards completely with honesty. They would say, well, she only touched me a little bit, so I'll say she didn't touch me and get the number of points she needed for each of those skills. Because they have to have a number of points in our gym every night. My wife sets that goal for them. And if they don't make that number of points, then they have to make them up. So in the process of watching that board, we find out which gymnasts will skate or stretch the truth. Then we got to have a moment of character coaching, right? Lots of gyms, I think, just overlook that. And they don't have the kind of cohesion amongst the team members and the coaches that they need to be able to have high-level kids. And so they're just focused on the technical skill in the back of the tricycle and some people's skill. But they're never going to call one of their kids out for lying or stretching the truth or, that kind of thing. And those are the moments, those are the coachable moments that those kids are going to remember. They're not going to remember all the things I did to get them to do a back handspring on the beam, but they will remember if I cared enough to sit down with them and talk about why it's important to be honest or trustworthy or caring or fair, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
okay.
That's the coaching piece that I think is very, very dynamic. We can learn character skills and we can actually learn character habits.
Okay. I think this is a really interesting conversation because you're making me think. And I'm thinking about character and how movable it is or immovable it is. And I'm thinking if character is based on your own principles, so that's an identity piece, hard to change unless you really, really want to. And ethics, easier to change, more malleable, perhaps. Morals, maybe somewhere in between, because I suppose if your ethics changes, your morals are going to probably follow suit. So it's not one of those, character doesn't appear to be one of those things that you can, I guess, I don't know what I'm trying to say. I guess what I'm trying to say is that the person must want to change their character because you can't persuade them to, or even because of most things you can get people to behave differently and then they'll change themselves. And I'm in an argument with myself, my quiet little debate in my head, whether you can get people to change their behavior and it will change their character. I don't think it's as easy as that as it is with other things because it's more of an identity piece. I don't know. You're the expert. You tell me.
I think that's a great point that you're making because a lot of times we try to peel those things apart, but they really seem like they're one piece. And so, by using the tricycle effect, I'm helping people to really visualize the fact that these character skills, like if I want to be more respectful, I practice respect, right? if I don't really care about the character skills, I never even think about them. And most corporations don't think about the character skills. I just talked to someone this morning. We went on a little run, and I met a new friend this morning, and they were telling me that they use the John Maxwell leadership moment every single week in their sales call meeting, right? And so this person was saying, hey, it's important for teamwork and leadership. And this person said, well, what is the definition of leadership? And the definition that came back to him was, it's making the sales calls and making your numbers. You're a leader then in sales. Oh, so now we're just talking about the technical, results. But what he was really after was, because he and I were having this conversation, he said that person never, ever discussed anything about, well, if you actually have good character skills, probably you're going to have more sales results, right? And so that's a very interesting part of it. That word influence from John Maxwell is a big part of this, because let me share something with you, Judith, that a lot of people don't know about me, but it went international and even national. It went viral when I ran for state senate one time. Mm-hmm. Back in the day when Twitter was first getting started, you only got a certain number of characters that you could actually post. Yeah. And so in this particular instance, I put on there, my first tweet was, because I was emphasizing to people that, hey, we don't need people, we don't need parties, we need people to come together. Yeah. We don't need division and divisiveness, right? So my first tweet was that Lincoln and Hitler were both strong leaders, which was true. They both had a lot of influence. If we take leadership, the definition of leadership is influence. Did Lincoln have great influence? Yes. Did Hitler have strong influence? Yes. My second tweet, like a minute later, was the difference was that Hitler had great character and Hitler had evil character. And that made the 5th most controversial tweet in history. It's still there in Time magazine. You can go look it up on the web. But that really started me on this whole character journey. If we don't really want to be a person who leads with character, we won't practice those character skills or talk about them. They won't be in our dialogue daily. We won't be sharing them with other people. And so that's part of that influence or leadership. We've got to lead with that character and have that as part of our normal dialogue every day. And it's got to be something that we're sharing with people on a continual basis to make it a habit. And character skills can become character habits.
Yeah. I'm going to play devil's advocate now, because you got me thinking again. With those, because I use a similar dichotomy, with 2 presidents, and I'm actually thinking that surely what we determine as good character is biased, right? So at the time, with your example, with Hitler, there would have been a group of people who thought he had excellent character. Clearly, because, he ended up doing what he was doing. And you can be in other cultures so you could have like someone who has great character in a kind of individualistic culture could be deemed as bad character in a collectivism culture. So determining something being, because someone can have great character but might be deemed as awful or offensive or whatever by a different group of people. So it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because I know what you're saying, and I totally agree with what you're saying, is that things should be character driven. But I think if we're going to be objective about it, who decides what character is the right character?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Each culture has its own societal and traditional values that people play within, right? I mean,
and
that's
each
what you are expected.
organization.
Yeah.
Because like if you went to Enron back in the day, I guess somebody who was full of integrity and honest could be deemed as a bad character in an environment where people were doing different things.
Right. Yeah, I think the one of the pieces that outcomes of the character is that each one of the character skills adds value to other people.
Mm.
It doesn't ever take anything away. If we're adding value to someone else, no matter what the culture is or the tradition, even if they're a tradition that we don't understand the value of, if it's adding value to their culture and to their people and making their lives more fulfilling, then there's value there from that character skill. And so that's why I sometimes say success is adding value to yourself with those competence wheels, but the character wheel adds value to others. So I use that as my litmus test. Was I more respectful? In Turkey, if I sit down in front of a Turk and I cross my legs and I have the sole of my foot facing them, that's an insult. But in the United States, we don't think anything about it, right? So I have to learn their culture so that I can operate within their traditions and their cultural, habits, so to speak, so that I can show them that I care. And so, yeah, same thing in Venezuela. We had different culture there too. So it was very interesting. And the first thing I did whenever I went to a different country, like Spain or Greece or Turkey or even Italy, because I visited all of those, I tried to learn their culture first so that I knew how I could care best and respect best the people in that culture. So you're spot on that.
That makes a lot of sense. I remember doing some work overseas and asking a group of people, oh, what's the culture like? Is there any business things I should know? And blah, blah. And I remember a few people saying, what difference does it make? Just go and do your thing. And I was like, that makes me feel a bit, and this is back like long time ago, but it made me, I didn't, I didn't do that because I didn't want to accidentally do something that would be offensive without, I think it's important to do that. I guess the more I think, oh, I love talking to you because it's just making me sick. Because I'm just thinking that I suppose people like us, well, there's a danger that we don't make it clear that when we're talking about things like character and leadership and all that, it's contextualized. Because I'm guessing from what you're saying that you and I probably share very similar views with
Probably.
similar, you know. So I'll give you an example. So when I'm talking about mavericks, like in my book, I talk about extreme mavericks, which are very toxic, and socialized mavericks who aren't, or they have a bit like what you're saying about the two guys you're talking about, they have the same leadership characteristics, but one is internally only and one is externally mainly, or you could say one is good and one is bad, right?
Yeah.
From a perspective, whichever perspective you have, you could argue the case. And then when I then talk about maverick leadership, I have to remind myself sometimes to point out I am talking about socialized mavericks, how they lead. Because every now and then, not so much now, but in the early days, we talked about it, somebody would say, oh, but mavericks are terrible because they do X, Y, and Z, and you do maverick leadership. It's like, oh, no, I don't mean those. I mean, because you can forget, isn't it, that people who come at things from a different perspective
Yeah.
can misunderstand. So you have to every whenever touch base and go define. So I find with my stuff, I tend to define what I mean up front and then carry on. So I don't have people going, oh, why would anyone want to leave like a maverick? Because in their head, they're seeing some bad connotations that I am not seeing. I'm seeing the positive because that's
Right.
where I'm focusing. And
Yep.
we can lose that, like you're saying with character, isn't it? Like the statement,
Yep.
I totally agree with everything that you're saying, but recognize that from another perspective, you're talking nonsense. Do you see what I mean?
Yep.
Because from their perspective, it's like the character of that individual was fine. The fact that they did X, Y, and Z makes sense. It's not what we agree with, what do you think? But for some people, that's not a character flaw.
Right. One of the things that I used to say in my class all the time is we're not just human beings. We aren't just existing here. We're
Mm,
dynamic and we should be growing, right? So we're human becoming. And I think in reality, we need to realize that that character aspect to us, if we realize that we can grow those character skills, it doesn't really matter whether we're in one culture or another. Some of those character skills have the same language without even speaking one physical word to another person in another culture, right? For instance, if I care for someone in Venezuela, it would be, and I was doing something for them, it would be the same kind of thing that would be interpreted as care in Turkey, for instance, just helping someone when there was no opportunity for them to give back to me, because a lot of the people there were from a lower caste system, right? But yet I might be helping them with a ride to get somewhere or something like that. And it can be simple things. It doesn't have to be big things all the time. And I think too often people put these really high hurdles or high bars set for themselves, and then they just feel like they can't reach it, so they just give up. And in this case, the first bar is that, hey, we got to bust that myth away that you can't grow your character. You really can. And our personality may not change, but our character will change. So what we exhibit from our personality is different. Abraham Lincoln said, the tree is the real thing, right? And the shadow is the reputation. So what exudes from our personality is the real thing. That's our real character. What someone sees in our behavior is just the reputation of that character. And we probably all heard people say, well, I judge myself on my intention, but I judge others on their actions. And that's the idea, going back and saying, hey, I got to make sure that I don't judge someone on their actions and I judge myself differently. I should be applying the same values across the board, right?
Yeah, because when you think about it, a tree's 3D, isn't it? And a shadow's in 2D, and the dimension that's missing is actually, the intention and all of that.
That's right.
Sorry. I was gonna say that talking to you makes me. I don't think I've even thought of character as deeply since I'm talking to you, but I'm sort of thinking that character is not universal, but the things that most people deem as good character, those with poor character respects those. It's the poor character traits that's not universal, but the good character traits that are universal, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to give you a story to highlight that, Judith, this is a great story because this really brings out the tricycle effect and helps people understand that character factor, right? In my cyber technology ethics class, 4 months is one semester, right? So these students start with me at the beginning. They have no idea they're going to get character ethics. And I'm a gymnastics coach. At the beginning of every class, I lead with character first. So I have a little chalk talk about a character skill, like caring or fairness or trustworthiness, right? Then I go into the technical skills, and we're talking about techie, geeky IT stuff, plus stuff in the past, plus stuff in the future that's still kind of considered science fiction. At the end of the semester, final day, exams. The one student that was one of my top students in the class came up to the front, handed in his exam to me. And I asked him, I said, so do you have a job for the summer? I had an IT company at that time, and I was thinking, oh, I'd love to hire this guy as one of my interns because he's very sharp, but he also is has great people skills. And he said, no, I'm going home. I said, really? You're not going to get a job at home? He said, no. And then he just stayed quiet. I thought for a second, should I ask him anything further? So then I said, well, so you're going home, you don't have a job, what are you going to do? And here's his response. He said, I've been in here with you, coach. And I encouraged all my students to call me coach. He said, I've been in here with you, coach, for 4 months. When I was growing up, I didn't get along with my dad at all. And for 4 months, I've heard you like my dad. I'm going home to build my relationship with my dad.
Oh, wow.
And so no matter how much of the technical stuff I put out there, that wasn't really what hit his heart, right? Really connected with his heart was the fact that I was emphasizing the character skills as important. And so he was going home to build that relationship with his dad.
It's interesting that you're saying about, hacking and the ethics of it, because a white hacker and a black hacker i.e., one that's hacking because they've been paid to by a corporation to find the holes, and one who's hacking because they want something from that corporation. Essentially, the skills are exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
They're
Absolutely.
exactly they're as good as each other. It just comes down to why. Why are you doing it, I suppose.
Yeah. And since I've been in IT now for 42 years, and I started in the Air Force, a lot of it was cybersecurity focused. And I tell people all the time, and because we put in ARPANET in Turkey, which was the predecessor to the internet, we were 30 years ahead of where we are here just within the last 5 to 7 years here in the United States. And that was back in the 80s. We were all wireless. We were already shooting laptops across mobile phones in 1987. We didn't do that until the last 10 years here in the United States, right?
It's
So,
kind of scary.
yeah. But at the same token, I know they're way further ahead than what we can imagine even right now. But
Oh,
the
yeah.
bottom line is that with any new technology that's coming out, depending on who is using it, they can use it for good or they can use it for evil. And that's the reason we need to get back to leading with character first, because if we don't, everything can just fall off the table, so to speak, and go the wrong direction. So we need people to consciously be making decisions with good character to build those skills and habits and coach others. If we had more leaders in corporate America or corporate anywhere in the world that were coaching their leaders to lead with character first, imagine what our companies could be.
Um,
One
you
of
know,
the other myths is that character is not measured. You can't measure character. But there is a company that's actually done that, and it's KRW International out of Minneapolis, St. Paul. And I got certified by them. They're one of the few that have done research over the last 10 or 15 years on just C-level people, CEOs, and what made them a virtuoso CEO if they were high-level character, and what made them low-level character leaders. And it's amazing to see the things because they didn't measure themselves. They didn't do it on an internal thing only about like DISC or other personality tests. They had their people around them, whether it was family or their corporate mid-level people that reported to them or lower level people, actually grade them on their character. And that's how they got their character scores. And so the virtuoso leaders were the ones who put the people first, and they led with character the best.
mm, that would be a perfect place to end, but I've got one more reflection.
Okay,
I was
sure.
thinking, I'm thinking, gosh, that was a great way to end, but I'm gonna just carry on. Um, I'm just sort of thinking that the problem with character, or the potential problem with character, is that it can be so influenced by society. So in the past, someone would be of good character who would be able to objectively make decisions, would seek to know more, look for the right answers, to listen to all of this. But as we, I don't know if it's a reflection of me just getting older or the society really is changing, but those kinds of things is becoming seen as bad characters. What do you mean you want to wait and find out? Why do you want to look at more resources? What do you mean that you're going to be open and trusting? Didn't you hear everybody thinks it's this? So I suppose the things that in the past we thought are of good character can be slowly squeezed out if society deems them not no longer necessary. So maybe the person of good character in 20 years might not be someone we would recognize 20 years ago, which is
Could be
kind
because
of
they're growing it. Yeah.
yeah. So I guess to end then, good leaders and good organizations and good governments, I guess, is are there to ensure that we don't lose the ability of knowing what makes a good character, and we'll fight to retain that and not go with, I don't know, a populist stance that suits a few rather than the whole, I guess.
Right. Each individual person has their own moral compass, and that front wheel I like to call is moral intelligence. The same company, KRW, the CEO and owner of that company was Fred Keel, and he wrote another book called Moral Intelligence, and it actually perfectly describes the struggles that we have with character, just like you just got done explaining. And those are things we all have to struggle with. I gave an example of this on a football team. The Eagles used to have, and when they were the Super Bowl champions a few years ago, they had a quarterback who had sat on the bench for a couple of years. Carson Wentz, their first line quarterback, got hurt, and so the second line quarterback had to step in, and he did, and he ended up being the most valuable player during the Super Bowl, and he ended up winning the Super Bowl with his team. When he went to the press conference, he didn't say to the press conference and answer questions about technical. He could have said, we did this pass really good. My line really blocked well. We did this. We did all the technical stuff. What he did was he said, you know what? I failed a lot in my life. And when you're failing, you need to embrace the struggle and the failure, because then you're growing your character. That was an amazing, amazing, statement to have put out to the press in a worldwide press conference, that you just won the Super Bowl, you're the most valuable player, and you're not even talking about yourself or your team. You're talking about the fact that you're just like everybody else. We all have failures. We all have struggles. And when we have struggles, just embrace it. So that's a great, great point.
Yeah, because as you were talking there, it's just making me think that what makes up character, there's just so much, courage, resilience, vulnerability, plus all the other things that we talked. So it's just, and I guess that it's just almost intangible, because there are so many variables to character. And then there's how much of your identity is based on your character. And maybe people that feel that it's not integral may have more movement than those that see it almost as one. You know what? I'm going to stop there, because I think we could, Dane, talk forever. I think what you probably will have to do is come back, and then we'll
I'd be happy to. It'd be my privilege, Judith.
Have another conversation, because I just want to keep talking, but then it will take forever to get it distributed.
I know how that goes. Yep, no worries. Yeah, just do small chunks, little steps. If I can leave your audience with one thing, is growing in character is a journey. It's not a destination. And if you take small steps, you can actually grow your character and not be worried about you can't be perfect. No one's perfect. And just like we just discussed, if you're struggling, if you're having a tough time in life, embrace it. Know that because of that, you're going to persevere and your character is going to grow.
Perfect. Dane, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, you're very welcome, Judith. Thank you very much for the privilege. And I just, I wish you the very best. And until next time, trek on.
Thank you. And thank you out there for tuning in to the Maverick Paradox podcast. I'm Judith Germain, your host, and I hope you've enjoyed today's conversation. Welcome back to the Maverick Paradox. This is the podcast for the pathologically curious. Are you leading or just managing? The best leaders amplify their influence, not their workload. I'm Judith Germain, a multi-award winning leadership expert, and my Amplify Your Impact and Influence mentoring helps senior leaders cut through uncertainty, strengthen their leadership identity, and lead with confidence. No off-the-shelf solutions, just tailored strategic mentoring that works. Ready to lead with greater impact? Visit bit.ly/amplify influence impact to find out more.